Thank you.
It's a small group which will represent the entire population
Hmm.
that we want to study.
Right. Nice. Very good. So rightly said, about the sampling, what you're stating, uh, a selection of a some part of aggregate which is based on which an inference is about to be drawn. So that process of extracting the information from the population is basically sampling. So sample actually represents the population which has been drawn, right? And it is widely used in the various research work. So there are various words that we use in the sampling space, various words, right? And you can see on my screen. And in this, the first very important here is population. So the population is the total of items about which information is desired. Now, it can be classified into the two categories, finite and infinite. The population is said to be finite if it is consist of a fixed number of elements, right? So that it is possible to identify it in a totality. To give you an example about the finite population, they are the population of a city or the number of workers in a factory or people number of people working in a one particular organization. So that's a finite approach. Infinite population is that population in which it is a theoretically impossible to observe all the elements. So in an infinite population, the number of items are actually infinite. To give you an example, okay, the stars in the sky, right? So for practical consideration, we use the term infinite population for a population that cannot be have a reasonable, resonation or a period of time. In this population, we take out certain set of samples. Sample is a part of a population that represents the characteristics of a population. So that is very, very important. So I in the last class did tell you that sample is denoted by capital N, and your sample is denoted by small n, right? So that's the statistical way of representation in the way we teach in the research methodology. After talking about the population and sample, we have a concept called sampling. Now, sampling is basically a process of selecting the sample for estimating the population characteristics. To rephrase or to emphasize, I would say a process of obtaining information about the entire population by examining only a part of it. And that is why you will see that whenever we talk about the research, we take out certain part of the information from the population, we do the statistical analysis, and then finally we infer or generalize for the entire population. In this, we also have sampling unit. Now, sampling unit is elementary unit or a group of which or a group of such unit which besides being clearly defined, identifiable and observable, and they are convenient for the purpose of sampling. That's why it is called sampling unit. Now, for an instance, in a family budget inquiry, right, usually a family is considered as a sampling unit since it is found to be a convenient for a sampling, and a required information can be ascertained from that. In a crop survey, for an example, a farm or a group of farms owned or operated by a household can be considered or may or or is considered for a sampling unit. So that's how we takes from the population to the sampling, and then we have a sampling unit. In this, we also have called sampling frame. So sampling frame is a list which containing all sampling units is known as sampling frame. Now, this consists of a list of items for which the sample is to be drawn. And then from the frame, I take out the sample survey. So sample survey is an investigation in which elaborate information is collected on a sample basis. That is where we call it sample survey. So you might have heard a word like random sampling, right? Or, snowballing. These are all sample survey and elaborated information which we collect from the sample frame. Once I collect the sample, so I see some in the chat box. Okay, sampling unit. So sampling unit is like when we talk about a family. So as I said that in a sampling unit, it is a very definable and observable approach. I can see it for the purpose of sampling. That concept is called sampling unit. So as I was talking about, I want to know, let's say, I give the example of the family, right? Or for that example, I want to know in a hospital, what is the salary of the doctors? So the hospital is your sampling unit. Okay. And then that is where from the sampling unit, I take out my sample frame. So that frame, which a list which contains of the sampling unit. So here we draw the samples out from. Are we good with this? So again, to give you about the sampling frame very simply, you will see the researcher might pick up, or identify only a few items from the population for a study purpose. Now, this selection is actually undertaken on the assumption that the sample data will be representative of the entire population. So the item picked up together, which comprise a sample, becomes a sample design. Okay. And from that sample design, I categorically do the sample survey. Now, what happens is in the sample unit, a singular value within a sample database is used, and sample frame is a comprehensive set of each item of the population from which a sample is to be obtained. I hope I've been able to give you the clarity now. Are we good? Thank you. Pleasure.
Yes, madam. Yes, yes.
Okay, so just to give you another more insight, a lot of time people do get confused with the sample and the census also. So sample is when we collect the data about from a chosen set which represents the total population. But the census is the collecting data about the entire population. So please don't get confused on that. Samples are small, census are large, and samples are short, the availability of the time, whereas census is long. And the population size is large for the sample, whereas the population size is small for the census. That's how we, generate. And you will see the sampling will have a sampling error. But in census, it is missing. But the cost, when I say sampling cost is less and census cost is high. So that's why it becomes very, very important when we talk about the sample approach. So as I talked about the sampling, right? Sample survey. So in this, we use the statistics also. And here the characteristics of a sample is nothing but a statistics. So what we also call it sample, or we also call it sample mean, proportion. And in this, there is another concept we use called parameter. And parameter is the characteristics of a population, which is again can be decided as population mean and proportion. So that's why you will see we write X bar as sample mean, but the population mean is written as mu. So this is how we need to characterize for the statistics and a parameter. And we also use the word called target population. The target population is the entire group about which the information is desired and the conclusion is made. So Sampled population is nothing but where the population which is actually sample is the sampled population. So that's why you will find that a lot of information gets used and resource of the sampling becomes very important. Now, the purpose of sampling is basically to save time and money. And it enables actually to collect the data, in a comprehensive manner. You will see the accuracy is gets observed, and here we measure it by conducting it from a trained and an experienced investigators. And sampling always remains the only way when the population contains infinitely many members. So that's why you will find that people end up getting and working towards the sampling aspect rather than working on the entire population. So there are a lot of stages to the sampling process. First, we define the population. From the population once gets defined, we identify the sampling frame. In the sampling frame, then we specify the sampling unit. Once the sampling unit is identified, then we do the sampling method, which method to use. Based on the method, we identify sample size. That means how much sample size should we have. And then we will have sampling plan, and then we collect the sample. So that is how we do that. So in this entire process, to give you a very, again, population I have made you understand. So sampling frame is, as a remedy, we seek a sampling frame which has the property that can be identified. Every single element includes in our sample. So the most straightforward type of frame is a list of element of the population, preferably for the entire population with an appropriate contact information. Sampling frame may be like telephone book, city directory, employee roster, listing of the students attending a university, or possible phone numbers. These are all frame. Now unit is what? The unit is within that frame, which is contains a single element or a group of element.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Suppose I have to conduct a survey or research something for a city of population 10 lakh. How can I
City of a
define these
population?
10 lakh?
अच्छा ठीक है.
So how can I define these parameters? Like कैसे मैं उसको समझ पाऊंगा
कैसे
थोड़ा सा?
करेंगे? अच्छा, तो आपने जो पॉपुलेशन बोला, पहली बात आप किस पे रिसर्च करना चाहते हैं, पहले तो ये बताइए.
कोई प्रोडक्ट है मेरा जिसे मैं सेल करना चाह रहा हूँ.
ओके, वो प्रोडक्ट यूज कौन कर रहा है?
वो प्रोडक्ट यूज कौन कर रहा है? पीपल बिटवीन लाइक 20 to 35 years of age.
तो पॉपुलेशन तो आपको समझ में आ गई कि आपके पास 10 lakhs पॉपुलेशन आपने बोली, राइट? तो दैट इज पॉपुलेशन. पॉपुलेशन फ्रेम इसमें क्या हुई? बिटवीन द एज ग्रुप ऑफ 20 to 30 पीपल. ओके, ठीक है.
सैम्पलिंग फ्रेम हुआ इसमें.
वो फ्रेम बना दिया ना आपने, उसी फ्रेम में आपने गलत. सो 20 to 30 ग्रुप वालों के लिए
जो सैम्पलिंग फ्रेम हमने जो टर्मिनोलॉजी यहाँ रखी है वो है मेरा दिस ब्रैकेट जिसमें मुझे करना है,
इसमें से आप सैंपल निकालो, राइट?
जी जी जी.
तो लेकिन बेसिकली ये फ्रेम जो है, ये जो 20 to 30 जो है, ये कहाँ से निकालोगे आप? ये यूनिवर्सिटी के बच्चों से निकाल रहे हो या जो जिनकी इनकम एक्स है वहां से निकाल रहे हो? So what is that? From where, from which particular part you will take it out? Or the people who are buying from Amazon that particular product, वो क्या है? वो that is called as frame. So are you taking, that's what I said, आप कोई city directory ले रहे हो या ये
okay, so basically this is a kind of demographics जो हम सेट कर रहे हैं, उनका behavior and interest मिला के. Okay,
right.
Okay.
And then फिर unit उसके अंदर further, राइट? उसके अंदर जो ये लोग, तो अब जो आपने बोला 20 to 30 ये जो है, तो ये यूनिट बन गया. सिर्फ मुझे 10 years के जो लोग हैं, जो जिन्होंने 20 से 30 years वाले लोग हैं, दिस बिकम्स माय यूनिट.
ओके,
राइट?
टारगेट ग्रुप, राइट?
हाँ. सो आईएसटी, अब जैसे एग्जांपल, आईएसटीडी स्टूडेंट इज अ पॉपुलेशन. सैम्पलिंग फ्रेम इज रिसर्च मेथोडोलॉजी स्टूडेंट्स जो पढ़ रहे हैं, ठीक है? यूनिट इसके अंदर जो आप जो आईएसटीडी का कोर्स कर रहे हैं, दिस बिकम सैम्पलिंग फ्रेम. आईएसटीडी तो इतना बड़ा है ना पॉपुलेशन, उसमें बहुत कुछ हो रहा है. उसमें जो आईएसटीडी का कोर्स हो रहा है वो सैम्पलिंग फ्रेम हो गया. मुझे स्टडी ये करना है कि रिसर्च मेथोडोलॉजी के कितने लोग रिसर्च करने वाले हैं फ्यूचर में. सो मेरे लिए सैम्पलिंग यूनिट कौन हो गई? जिन्होंने रिसर्च मेथोडोलॉजी की क्लासेस अटेंड करी है, वो मेरी सैम्पलिंग यूनिट हो गई.
ओके.
मेथड क्या हुआ? अब मैंने सोचा मैंने इसमें से रैंडम सैंपल उठाऊंगी. So I can just pick up randomly. So even let's say in every class, after every week the class is happening, I will pick up 2 students. So let's say in the today's class, I will pick up 2 students randomly. So that becomes a sampling method.
ओके.
That's
रैंडम
how
सैम्पलिंग हो गई है.
मैं randoms carry, but I'm going to teach you right now which all methods are there.
जी जी.
ठीक है, सिस्टमैटिक भी हो सकती है, रैंडम भी हो सकती है, राइट, पर्पसिव भी हो सकती है, जजमेंटल भी हो सकती है. सो दैट विल फिगर इट आउट कि हम वो कैसे डिसाइड करते हैं कौन सा मेथड यूज करना है.
ठीक है मैम. थैंक यू.
Pleasure. Good. Thank you for asking this. I think this brings the clarity to all of you.
Ma'am,
Huh?
one more time, the example that you just gave about, like, suppose ISTD, we take that example, ki how many students who have taken research methodology course are going for research in the future. So if that is my study, then for here, suppose my population is, like you mentioned, people like ISTD, and the sampling frame, suppose we take, can we say this, like there are so many different batches, so we consider, suppose
The course, ISTD course, ISTD course. Even even batch can become your sampling frame. Very good.
right.
You can say that, yes, I'm using that course as a sampling frame, which is also pretty good. Within that course, let's say in the batch 6, अभी आप लोग का कौन सा batch है?
84th.
84 can be a frame.
Okay.
And
okay.
then
So can
in
it be multiple, like can it be 80th to the 84th is a sample frames, and then my unit is like 1% from the 80th, one from 81st, 82nd.
the research methodology classes, or you want to check कि yes जो लोग specially research का classes attend करे, that becomes my unit.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Good. And then how many sample I take it out is again from the students. Right? Okay. So shall we proceed further? Yeah. So as I talked about the sample over the senses, what are the various advantages, that how it saves times over the cost. It is absolutely on the situation where we approach, and the decision making may not have too much of time. That's why we don't work on the senses and we work on the sample. Okay, so let's move and understand between the sampling and the non-sampling error. Anyone has heard of this sampling and non-sampling error?
No, ma'am.
Okay, no worries. What happens in the sampling and it's very, very important that there are errors gets arise, when we take some set of sample, which is not representative of the population. And there is a non-sampling error, which we also call it the error when it arises not because the sample is not a representative of the population, but because of the other reasons. And the reasons could be maybe because of the transferring of the data from the questionnaire, or maybe from the population is not properly defined, or it was not a part of the sampling frame. So that's how the error came up. Now in this, what usually happen is, in the sampling error and sampling frame, we really have to take care and understand how much error is allowed. So in the last class, I did talk about that we give the definition of 5% error is allowed, or 1% error is allowed. So we work with the 95% of the confidence level, or we work with the 99% of the confidence level, and that is where you define on that. So it is very, very important to please figure it out and work on it. And that brings a very strong categorization, because if you will not do this categorization, it becomes very, very difficult to give you the justification generalization for the research that you have. So let's try and understand with this errors that of either I'm working either with a 5% error or 1% error. Based on that, I use my sampling design. Now, sampling design is of 2 types. One is probability sampling design, and second is non-probability sampling design. Okay, so that's how it is. The probability sampling design are of various type, which is there on the screen, and I'm going to take you through one by one. So simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, cluster sampling. These are all, probability sampling design. The second one is called non-probability sampling design, which is types like convenience sampling, judgmental sampling, snowballing, quota. Please remember this very important question you will see in your exam from the exam point of view. And you will find that this thing is coming up in your exam. When we talk about, the probability sampling is a technique which is in which the sample from a large population actually are chosen using a method which is based on the theory of probability. So in the stats, you must have read this particular subject, right? Statistics. Now, when we talk about the this probability design sampling, uh, probability sampling is majorly known for its random sampling or chance sampling. Okay, and in this samples, as I mentioned, is taken in such a manner that each and every unit of the population has an equal and a positive chance of being selected. So that's why the unit becomes very, very important. So जो हमने अभी ISTD के एग्जाम्पल एक लिया था, उसमें जो 84 का जो बैच अगर हम ले रहे हैं, उसमें रिसर्च मेथोडोलॉजी का अगर हमने यूनिट लिया है, we need to ensure that there is a equal possibility and a positive chance of getting picked up major samples for which I'm going to do a study on. So in this way, you will find that the samples would be truly represent the overall population. And that's why you will see the random selection of sample among all the units of the major population is properly used and becomes very, correctly applied. So the sampling procedure, it's like simple random sampling, the first one. Simple random sampling is each member of the population is numbered. Then a given size of the sample is drawn with the help of random number chart. So the other way is to do a lottery. So हम लोग आपने देखा होगा कि वो chits बना लेते हैं, and we put those chits and we throw that chits and we pick up tuck tuck tuck. So that's a part of a random sampling. So, in this, we write all the numbers on a small uniform piece of papers, hold the paper, put them in a container, take them out, which is required a lot in the random manner from the container. And you will see in the kitty parties how it has been done. So it is relatively simple to implement, but the final samples may miss out some small subgroup also. So the very good aspect and the advantage of the random sample is it is free from the biases. It's random. The disadvantage is it is difficult to obtain. And this is due to because it's randomness. So there is a freak result which can sometimes be obtained. So we really need to be ensured that if we are using random sample, are we using and getting the right set of sample or not? When I talk about systematic random sample is required when we number the entire population and we say that every nth number, let's say second or fifth or 10th or 25th number, as the case may be, is selected to constitute the sample. So this basically represents the subgroup. And the interesting advantage of this is it eliminates other source of biases. It can actually eliminate that. But the disadvantage is it can introduce a biases where the pattern used for the sample coincides with the pattern of the population. So that's how it is a way you want to use for the systematic. Now, when we talk about another one, that is, we call it as a stratified random sampling. Okay, stratified random sampling, at first, the population is first divided into the group or a strata. So the strata is basically a group each of which is a homogeneous with respect to the given characteristic feature. Now from each strata, then the samples are drawn randomly. Then it is called stratified random sampling. For an example, with respect to the level of socio-economic status, the population may first be grouped into such a strata, example, high, middle, or a low income group people, and then we randomly sample draw from each group. That's the way stratified random sample happens. The sample size for each subgroup can be fixed to a representative sample. And that is why you will see it leads to an advantage of accuracy in the results than the simple random sampling. So that's why you will find when the researchers, they will use instead of using simple random sampling, they will go for stratified random sampling. I have not witnessed any major disadvantage of this particular, and it is really used a lot in the research space. You will also see, in the stratified sample, the population is further broken down into different categories, and which is like the quota sampling technique, that gets used. So let's try and figure out on this aspect of how it works furthermore. So I talked about the random sampling, I talked about the systematic, I talked about the stratified random sampling, and I talked about the strata, which is in a singular, and stratum and strata. It all depends whether it's a singular or a plural approach, right? So we work on that. The another approach is the cluster sampling. Cluster sampling, in some cases, the selection of units may pass through various stages before you finally reach your sample of study. So for this state, for example, you may divide it, the strata may be divided into district, then district into blocks, blocks into village, villages then further can be identifiable group of the people. And then we take the random sample or a quota sample from each group. So example, when we are taking a random selection of 3 out of 15 district of a state, okay, 6 blocks from each selected district, or for that matter 10 villages from each selected block, even 20 or 20 to 25 household from each selected village, totals to X number of respondents. And if you will see, when we calculate that, the number of respondents would be somewhere good or 3,000 plus. This design is actually called cluster sampling. So the beautiful aspect of the cluster sampling is less expensive, time consuming than a fully random sampling. It shows a regional variation. And the major disadvantage is not a genuine random sample. It is likely to yield a biased result. So that is how it goes. And in a cluster sampling, to put it very simply, we divide the whole population into a cluster, okay, with a well-defined approach. Treat the cluster as a sampling unit, and you choose the sample of cluster according to the procedure. The procedure, as I mentioned, it can be in any way that you decide. So that is how we figure it out, how we work on the respective approach. There is also in the cluster sampling, after that we have other approaches into the sampling. There is an area sampling, multi-stage sampling. These are all high-end sampling, which I will not go very much in detail, because those are very good when we have usage for the researcher, those who are working on it. Any query, any question into the probability sampling? Okay. Now let me jump through the another approach of the non-probability sample design. Non-probability sample design is based on selection by a non-random means. So this can be useful for a certain studies, for example, quick survey where it is difficult to get the access to the whole population. So you will see that in the non-probability sampling, where some elements of the population have no chance of selection. And these are sometimes referred to as a out of coverage or undercovered. Where the probability of selection can't be accurately determined. So it involves the selection of an element which is based on the assumptions regarding the population of interest. Now this forms the criteria of selection. Okay. Now in this, because of the selection of elements is non-random, non-probability sampling does not allow the estimation of sampling error. So the non-random and the subjective method we also call is where the selection of the population elements comprise the samples which depends on the personal judgment, absolutely on my personal judgment. That is why it includes accidental, convenience, opportunity, ability, haphazard, grab sampling. So this is one of the type of, so the convenience sampling is also called accidental sampling, opportunity sampling, availability sampling, haphazard sampling, or a grab sampling. Okay. Second is the quota sampling. Third is judgmental sampling. It is also called subjective sampling or a purposive sampling. So please do not get confused between, is there a difference between a judgmental sampling or a purposive sampling? No, it is one and the same. Then we have a snowballing, right? So let's take understanding of the convenience or else accidental sampling. The words actually grabs the attention of accidental sampling. In an accidental sampling, sometimes known as a grab, convenience, or the opportunity sampling. Okay, it is where it involves a sample which is being drawn from the part of the population which is close to hand. So something which is near to me, I'll do that. So a sample population gets selected because it is readily available and convenient. And the researcher using such a sample cannot scientifically make a generalization about the total population from this particular set of sample because it doesn't represent entire enough. To give you an example, if an interviewer has to conduct a survey at a shopping center early in the morning on a given particular day, let's say on a Valentine Day. So people that the person is going to interview would be limited to those given who are there at that given point of time, which would not represent the views of the other member in the society or in that particular area. So if the survey was to be conducted at a different times of the day, with the different times per week, maybe if it is not a Valentine Day, so this type of sampling is most useful for a pilot testing. So I have witnessed in a corporate level, organization level, a lot of people during the pilot study, they take care of the convenience sampling. The why we do that, the reason is very simple, because the problem, the primary problem I would say is with the availability of the sampling, and it can be certain what population the participants in the studies are representing it. And method of selection is haphazard. The case study can be used in this, or probably it don't represent the particular population, so we just have to figure it out. So that's why you will see that in this particular aspect of convenient sampling. It has the advantage of, often people respond to the surveys, and they're, very much okay to get the insight from the respondent, and based on the availability of the sample, which is not a bad way to group for a particular survey. In this, we also have a quota sampling. Quota sampling is where the population is first segmented into a mutually exclusive subgroups, just as what I mentioned in the stratified sampling of the probability sampling. So the judgment is used to select the subject or a unit. So I'm purposely emphasizing the word unit, so that you all can resonate it, from each segment, right, which is based on a specific proportion. Example again, let's say an interviewer may be told to sample 200 females and 300 males between the age of 25 to 55. So in quota sampling, the selection of the sample is non-random. Okay. So the interviewer might attempt to interview those who will be look most helpful. And these samples may be biased because not every set a chance of selection. So again, we end up using the random element with its greatest weakness and the quota versus probability of a matter we use on this. You will see that in the purposive or a judgment or a subjective sampling, the sample is selected with a definite purpose in view, and the choice of sampling unit depends entirely on the discretion and the judgment of the investigator. Now, this sampling suffers from the drawback of favoritism, even for that matter, nepotism, depending upon the belief and prejudice of the investigator, and thus does not give a representative sample of the population. So this sampling method is seldom in nature and cannot be recommended for the general use, since it is often biased due to the element of subjectivity. So please ensure whichever method that you are using, it should have this solid reason why have you opted for this particular sample method. Okay. Then there is a snowballing. Snowballing is a very, very powerful non-probability random, non-probability sampling method. In the snowballing, researcher identifies one member of a same population of interest, speaks to him or her, and then asks that person to identify others in the population that the researcher might speak to. So this person is then asked to refer the researcher to another person, and this gets so on, and then you do the collect the sample. This technique is used against the law of incidence, or I would say the word is called rare population. Now, sampling is a big problem in this case. So that's why you will see the chain system of referrals gets collected. The sample size of the snowballing is really small. The cost is also low. That's the major advantage of it. The biases can be one major disadvantage of this. The referral names obtained from the sample is the initial stage, may be similar to those of other initial sample, sampled. To give you an example here, I remember somebody was doing a research on people who used to like having wine with the chili wine with the chili cheese, right? Which is there made in Africa, Australia. And very rare of the rare people have this peculiar taste. And so there was a lot of research was happening, and this person was trying to find out how the people feel, and how does it taste, and how do why do you like such taste and all that. So very unique approach, and that's how the snowballing was done in this. So let me now reinstate the sampling error and the survey biases. So the survey results are typically subject to some set of error, which as I mentioned. So the total error is classified as the sampling error, and the term error actually includes systematic biases. Okay. So when we talk about the sampling error, it includes by the sample design, as we have already studied. And in this, the selection biases and the random sampling error becomes the true true category of it that focuses on. Okay, so that's how these two works on the error front. Any query, any question now? Okay, now let's determine the sample size. How do we identify how much sample size should we have? So this is very, very crucial and very, very important. The yeah, someone has some query? Okay. All right, cool. So let's move ahead now. Let's try and understand on the getting into the space of what should be the sample size, right? So it's really important that we take care and understand the sample size, determination. So one of the questions I have seen the researcher asking, what should be the size of the sample, or how large or small should it be? So if the sample size, which is small n, is too small, it may not serve to achieve the objective of your research. And if it is too large, it may incur huge loss and wastage of resource. So the general rule is, one can say that sample must be optimum size. It should neither be excessively large or not too small. And the sample size should be large enough to give confidence interval with its desired approach, and the size of the sample must be chosen with some logical process before the sample is taken out to the universe. I'll just put, someone is on the 1 minute. Could you just put yourself on mute? I'll just see that. I'll just put this, there's a disturbance. Yeah, now it is fine. Thank you. Right. Okay. Yeah. So I was talking about the sample size. Now, there are certain things that needs to be taken care is the nature of the universe. Now that I already talked about, it can be homogeneous or heterogeneous. Okay. Homogeneous items in the universe, a small sample can serve the purpose, but in an heterogeneous, a large sample would be required. Number of classes proposed. So when I say in many of the classes proposed, that is a group or subgroup, it is to be formed. So the large sample would be required, because a small sample might not be able to give you a reasonable number of items in each class group. And then we also need to focus on the nature of study. So if items are to be continuously studied in an intense manner, then the sample should be small enough, which is good. But in a general study, you will find that the size of the sample should be large. Okay. And obviously we see the availability of the finances. We also check the techniques of sampling that we are going to use, which I just talked to you all about. Okay. So in this, you will find that uh, there are set of formulas that gets used to identify the sample size for estimating the population mean. And you see, as I mentioned, the sample size denotes as the small n, the population standard deviation is the sigma sign, margin of error, that is E, and the confidence level is always by Z, that is we call it Z, right? And if we have the determination of sample size, so you can write all, I mean you will have these slides with you, so you should know the formulas pretty well, and you should be able to determine and identify what should be the sample size. When we talk about when we are estimating population proportion, which is, when I say proportion, nothing but a number considered in a comparative relation to a whole. That's why we call it proportion, which we denote by P. And Q is 1 minus P. Okay, so this should be again known. So when the population proportion is known, we use the formula n is equal to z square PQ divided by E square. But when the proportion is not known, it says 1 by 4th z square over E square. So that's how the formula is. So how do we do that, right? We first we determine the sample size, which is probably one of the most important phase in the sampling process. Generally, the larger the sample size, the better the estimation. But always larger sample size cannot be viewed or cannot be used, as I mentioned, related to the time and the budget constraint. So moreover, whenever the probability sample reaches a certain size, the precision of the estimator cannot be significantly increased by increasing the sample size. So always remember, for a larger population, the precision of the estimator actually depends on the sample size, not on what the proportion of the population has been sampled. So to give you an example, a researcher may like to estimate the mean of the universe within the range of +3 and -3 of the true mean with the 95% confidence level. So when I set this statement, we will say that the desired precision is +3 and -3. Suppose the true mean is 100. So the estimated value of the mean will be not less than 97, that is 100 minus 3, which is 97, and not more than 103, which is 100 plus 3, which is equal to 103. So in other words, all the means that the acceptable errors, which is E, which denotes by E, is equal to 3. So when we keep in view such, the determination of sample size becomes very specified and very easy to understand, right? And that is how you will find a lot of people start doing a calculation based on this. Now you will feel, based on the formulas, examples, people can identify how much sample size can be used, should be identified, should be worked upon, and that gets used. And so please ensure that yes, sampling error, which is that yes, we expect a 95% confidence level, mostly the world population work on that level aspect, so you can actually take care and focus on that. So that is what it is talks about into the element of the sample allocation. So just a small example of, based on the formula which I have given here, that it is from the respective industry. I have identified frame, either could be in the form of the age group, or maybe the people living in a particular economical class. The frame proportion could be based on the male and female. So I want to take 50-50. So we do that. And the sample that I can get out of it is, respective number. By using the formula on this side, when I gave you this, right, I calculate this and I can, with the total sample is there. So then from the entire population of the frame of 190, minimum sample I need to collect is 70. So anyhow, I'm not going into the detail of the formulas and the calculation because that is already there in your books and the reference, which you can always refer to. Okay. But the most important here is, again, if I just rephrase and reinstate here is, the process of sampling for every research should include the respective things which I'm going to mention right now is for the best of the decision. The first one is defining the sample population. Please, 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 I would again request the in totality, please understand the population on which the research is to be conducted. Although the research will actually involve only a small sample population, it is really important to establish the characteristics of the population so that you can match up with those of the sample. So that's why you will see in a research intended to study the cause of increased absenteeism in a graduation college, the population would be of the student of the college there. Okay. Then the frame, understand the sampling frame. And I've seen a lot of people getting confused between the frame and the unit. Please don't do this. Just get the real clarity in place. So the precondition criteria for any element of the population to be selected as a part of the total sample must be clearly established. So when I talked about the college as an example, so continuing with this example, you are setting up the parameter for the student to form a part of the sample. This is your absolutely minimum percentage of the classes attended. Clear cut frame has been given. Then which method to be used? Probability or non-probability. The techniques have been told to all of you. And whether you want to work on a probability or non-probability is up to you. But my suggestion would be, if you want to make your study very substantial, work on the probability sampling method, because you're able to give the strong justification for your research. And when we talk about selecting the sample size, which is finalizing how much final count of the respondent to be covered, the sample size should be big enough to be able to represent the entire population. And what I have witnessed is I mean, even if you don't know how to apply the formula, just on the research papers, I'm saying, but when the population size is, the sample is, if you're working for the large population size, if the sample size is good with, somewhere around 350 plus, you have a good to go for the research purpose in the PhD. Or for that matter, MPhil. Now the MPhil is not happening. It's like people straight away go for the research. And then sampling data and collection, which is chosen from the collection of the techniques that we have. As I mentioned about, another is when we talk about the sample size estimation with the mean, again, given you the formulas that I'll not go into the detail, but the calculation, please, the first is the population size. So the total number of the people that fits the research demographic is that which is available, that needs to be used and adopted. Please fix the margin of error, that is the confidence interval. There is no such samples will be a perfect. Let me be very, very honest and candid. Don't think that whatever you're doing is with a 100% confirmation that the samples will be perfect. No, my dear, it is like we have to take the confidence level has to be set a limit on how much high or low as compared to the population mean is acceptable to the researcher. And there can be a fluctuation, and the acceptable range is between +5% to the -5%, keeping the confidence level at the 90%, 95%, or 99%. It is all up to you based on the actual mean falling within the set confidence interval. So there is a set mathematical calculation, the z-score. So the confidence level rate to a z-score is remains constant value. So you don't have to look at into the table, the z table. So the 90% z-score is 1.645, 95% z-score is 1.96, and 99% z-score is 2.326. So this should be very, very clearly remember. I can, share this with you, all of you, on the chat box. 1 second. Okay, I've given you this confidence level for the 90% Z score is 1.645, 95% is always 1.96, 99% is 2.326. Okay, and you will find this becomes very handy, and you will see the the identification of the category of the identification of sample size becomes easier. So there was a word like sampling error and non-sampling error I did mention. So sampling error is nothing, it's a principal source, as I mentioned. It is a sampling method which is applied, and the sample size which is focused more on the accuracy of the research, right? Now the sampling error arises due to the sampling technique used to draw a sample becomes a sampling error. Non-sampling error is due to the reasons other than sampling techniques is a survey during the survey process. So the sample size and the sampling error, you will see it decreases with the increasing in the sample. So जितना जितना sample बड़ा होता जाता है, आपके error कम होते जाते हैं. Whereas in non-sampling error, the increases with the increasing in the sample size. Because let me reinstate again the difference in the sampling error. The sampling error arises due to the sampling technique that I'm using. So which technique you have used, random, systematic, convenience, whatever. So the technique, whether it was to be used that or not, because of that, the error can happen. And also the cause is deviation between the sample mean and the population mean, right? So we all understand the sample mean and the population mean now. Sample mean is denoted by X bar. Population is described as mu, okay? And the type is always random mostly. And in the random sampling error, as I mentioned, other than sampling technique, during the survey process, the error happens is the deficiency in the analysis of the data. Right? So this is what we covered today. Any query, any question anybody has? Yes, any query, any question. Yeah, I see. Neelam says no query from me. Thank you. Anyone else? I hope this topic is clear to all of you now. I mean, maybe you can come on the screen because some of you missed out the last session on the hypothesis, and I would suggest that kindly go through the presentation, and I would really request please have the detailed insight about each sessions that we have covered till now. Yes.
Madam, question.
Yeah, Rajesh ji.
Do we understand that the sampling error is essentially when an invalid sample or sample which doesn't belong to that frame creeps in and we start
Yes,
evaluating that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It will. That becomes a non-sampling error.
That's a sampling error. That's where my confusion is. Sampling error is, you said it's due to the technique, which means my frame is incorrect. I was supposed to say pick up all students or somebody, a population from a certain demographic, this thing, and sex, but I am land up getting a different demographic, or I land up picking people like just from a directory is not of that area, or it's old, and I land up examining a wrong sample. That's in the first place a sampling error. Am I right in understanding?
Absolutely.
Perfect. That's it. That's all I wanted to know. Thanks.
Perfect. Anyone else? Any other query? Super. All right. So, and we are good to close for the today. And then I'll just